Hey guys, so I've managed to kill the John Deere lawnmower, unfortunately. I was out using it for a couple of hours. I thought, I best check the oil. I thought I'll do it afterwards. You always do, never check it there and then. I thought it'd be fine. And just randomly cut out on me, and then I couldn't get it restarted. So it's sat there ever since. So let's have a look and see if we can find out what's wrong with it. So if we have a look at what it's doing, let's pop the key in. Let's set the choke. If we try and turn it over, manages what, 1.5 turns. It's not good. I would say could be a bit of compression lock maybe, or let's have a look, see if we can turn it by hand. So that's quite free, and then it hits, it goes really tight. You can actually turn it through, then it goes loose again, which says to me something's bent. I'm not hearing metallic noises or anything like that. So I'm going to rip the front end off, and I think first course of action will be to drop this valve cover off here. Once we've got that off, we can have a look at the valve lashing and just see, just to make sure nothing's come loose and he's bouncing around in there. So I'll put the battery on charge as well to give that a good charge to make sure it wasn't that. Just grab my ratchet and my 10mm, my extension bar, got my nice organised toolbox for once. Okay, so I've dropped the front end off. I've had to disconnect the headlight cable, and there's 4 bolts there holding the bracket in for the front end. So I'm just going to drop these 10mm bolts out on the valve cover. Looks like the original gasket in as well, so I don't think they've ever been opened. So anyway, let me drop them off and I'll be back with you. They look okay, but you don't know until you get the push rods out. So that was nice and loose at the minute, that was solid. If we rotate and crank the engine, they're both working. Pressure comes off that one, goes onto that one. Cold air intakes, looks like an aluminium push rod, and obviously the exhaust is a solid steel one. So it looks like we're going to have to go to a full engine teardown on this one and see what's going on the inside. So I think that's safe to say that's the winter project sorted. Doing some research, I found out that's not the standard engine that comes on the X125. This one here has been upgraded to an 18.5 horsepower engine, which is quite powerful. I think they usually come with around about 11-12 horsepower. So unfortunately, that means this engine to replace is about £1,000, which I didn't really want to put that kind of money because I only paid 500 for the mower. And last year I stripped all the mower deck off, all the blades, everything, new spindles, new bearings, the works. So that's all good. I put new belts on. So what I think I'm going to do as a bit of a project this winter is strip the engine out, strip the engine down, completely rebuild the engine, strip everything off the actual body and hammerite the frames up, respray the body, repair that seat, needs a bit of TLC, probably repaint all the plastics as well. Anyway, oh yes, also needs a new tyre. I keep blowing up. I mean, you're doing that for ages rather than replace it, so got to get a new tyre on order. Look like we're going to be tearing that engine down to find out exactly what happened. So I've got a couple of suspicions as to what it could be. One is that something's bent. It's probably got too hot. The Briggs & Stratton engine, which is what that one is, it uses because it's single cylinder, it uses a splash system. So it hasn't got an oil pump or a filter. Basically, it retains a certain amount of oil in the casing of the engine, and as the components turn, they have little paddles on them that lift oil up, and it basically greases all the parts in the engine that need to be greased and lubricates them. That's okay, but there's very little tolerance for you not keeping an eye on the oil like I've done and letting the oil get low, and it eventually will heat up and things will start to warp and bend, which I think is one of the possibilities. Now the other possibility is the engine does feel as though it's a little bit compression locked. So for these engines to start, they have to be able to release the pressure out the cylinders or out the cylinder before it'll actually allow the engine to turn over. So that causes problems with difficult starting. And I think that's as we turn and crank the engine, we kind of get halfway there and it goes tight. That leads me to think either something's bent or the compression's building up. So I think there's a possibility that the compression's built up. I think on these engines, looking at the schematics, the crank actually has an inbuilt compression relief device, which advances the timing on the exhaust valve to release the gases out of the engine, release the compression, so that it can turn over. So I think that's one of the two possible scenarios that we're looking at. So I'm going to get that engine unbolted. It's only a few bolts to whip it off. I'll get it in the workshop and we'll get it torn down. I will show you how I refit the engine rather than pull it out, because that'll be a little bit more informative. Anyway, let's get on with it. So we've flipped the engine upside down. I've drained all the oil out. What I need to do now is drop these case bolts off. I've already loosened one of them off, which is this one here. So they're red Loctited in. So anyway, I'm going to get my impact gun and I'm going to loosen all these off. We'll pop the casing off and then have a look inside the carnage. So let's rip out these 13mm bolts. Okay, so that's lifted. So let's carefully now try and prise the case off. Let's have a quick look inside. Make sure nothing's about to fall out. There we go. So that's the cover come out intact. We'll get that clean off. There's the governor. That seems to be intact, which is cool. And here's the camshaft. Huh. Okay, so there should be an assembly here. Try not to get oil everywhere. So that hole there, there's a compression relief system that fits around that seal there, that when the cam starts to turn, it opens up to allow the pressure out so that it doesn't compression lock the engine, and that's what's happening at the minute. The engine's getting compression locked, so it's exactly as I thought. So I need to order another 579 cam, and it kit's around about a 40 quid rebuild kit. So we'll get that on order and get it fixed. So we've had some genuine Briggs & Stratton parts turn up. We've got a new camshaft, which I'll show you in a minute, and we've got all the gaskets that we need to put this back together. First thing we've got to do is clean this out and then tidy up the mating surface for the gasket, and then we can start to reassemble the engine. We've also got to clean out the casing as well, just to make sure that there's no leftover filings or anything that can damage the engine once it's back together. Right, so I've cleaned both the mating surfaces up. I basically used a Stanley blade to go around and get all the paper gasket off, and then I've used some 180 grit wet and dry just to go over and sand the edges down without removing any material. If we have a look over here at the casing, that's exactly the same. The only bits that I struggled to get to are around these pins here, the locator pins. So we're going to get the cams reinstalled and then get everything back in, all the governor and everything, and get this button back up. So here's a new camshaft, and that there is a compression relief device that I spoke about before. And how it actually works is, let's try and get you in focus. The inertia, so as when the engine starts, there's no inertia on the cam, right? So that extends the lobe out to push the lifter for the exhaust gases to allow the compression of the engine to be released to allow the initial turn and start. Once the inertia builds up on the cam, you see that there, look? That lobe goes flat, which alters its normal timing, so the engine can function when it's running. So I'm going to get this dropped in and get it all timed up. So we're just giving everything a bit of an oil up, because I don't like to dry start things. So I'll put the bottom lifter, get some new lifters with the kit by the way. I'll put the bottom lifter in already. So if you grease it up, make sure that slides nice and easy. We'll pop that in. Now it's time to put the cam in. Now it's important that we line up the two timing points. So just feel for the socket, and then you can lift it and turn it. So we've got them two marks for the timing lined up there. That's the cam sat back in. So you'll see now the lobes line up with the lifters down there. Obviously the lifters connect through the push rods into the valves in here. So I've just lined the new gasket up on there using the locator pins. Now I need to drop the head casing back on and get that nipped up. Right, I've managed to get the engine casing back on. You've got to be, if you well oil the shaft, you've got to watch this seal going through. Just get a flat blade screwdriver and just sit the seal down, make sure it doesn't roll up, just to make sure it goes back through without causing any leaks. Now what we need to do is get the bolts. I've got my blue thread lock. I'm not going for red. Red's a bit overkill for this. So we're going to use blue. And then we're going to run them bolts in and get all this nipped up. Right, so we've flipped back up on end. Put the caps back on for the valves. And I've loosely put the rockers back on. And for now we're just going to tighten them down finger tight as far as we can, making sure that we've always got the push rods inserted into the recess. Then we're going to manually crank the engine over, and when each valve opens fully, we can then set the clearance, the lashing on the valve. So I'm just going to go and do that. So the lashing on the valves, when the pressure's off, this one should be a loose 0.15, which is what we've got no drag barely at all. Then where's my spanner gone? Here it is. If I crank the engine over, so the pressure's on the other valve, to there, get the same feeler back in. This should be a little tighter, so you can hear that there, look. Bit of drag. To be honest, we could probably get away with just tightening that a little bit. So what we'll do is just crack this X off there, tighten it down a little bit more. So that's that tight, can't even get it in now. Loosen it off to about there. So we can do it one-handed. But basically you have to hold that nut, tighten it up. So I'll pop the engine back on the chassis, and there's 4 bolts underneath that retain it. Obviously one there, there's another one in there, that's the last one we've got to get in. There's another one around there and one around there. So here's the bolts. So I'm going to get the last one in, which hopefully I can try and squeeze my hand. Nope, I can't. I'm gonna have to jack the front end up. What I usually do is lift it up and put it on the workbench. So I'll do that. I've also reconnected the electrical connections. There's one here, one there. I've got to reconnected the connection from the starter solenoid to the starter. I need to tighten that up. Then I've got to drop the live onto the battery, and the negative onto the battery. I've also, coming around here, reconnected the fuel line onto the fuel pump. So I've got to now find and reconnect the throttle cable onto here. It's around somewhere. and then we should be good for our first start once I've checked the oil level. Obviously got to refit the air filters and the cover as well. So that's the throttle cable reattached. It's just got a Z-bend in it. You pop it in there and then put it into that clamp, and then move from the throttle, opens it fully up and closes it, which is good. So I'm going to pop the front end up. I've got to pop the pulley onto the crankshaft underneath and reconnect the belts, well, re-thread the belts back through, re-secure the cutting deck back up to where it's going to have to drop that down to get to the belts, get the air filter on, get the cover on, and then we'll reconnect the battery and try and turn her over. Okay, so we've got the pulley reattached to the crank. There's a top belt up there which we put on as we're putting the pulley on. There's a little keyway that you need to line up on the crank as well. And then we've put the drive belt on for the cutting deck and put it through the guides here. I've also secured the cutting deck back up with these pins. So now we need to lift the mower back down onto the ground, and we'll get some fuel put in it and see if she'll turn over. So it actually turns out I used the wrong method and the wrong specifications to set the valves. Good job I double checked them. So I've dropped the cover back off. I'm going to drop the spark plug back out. Then we need to find top dead centre plus 1/4 inch. I'll pass on the compression stroke, which I'll show you in a minute. Just let me drop this spark plug out, I'll be back with you. So I've got the spark plug out. It's not in the best of shape, so we'll just clean that up. It's not that old, it's probably about 6 months old, so it just needs a bit of a light sand. I'll double check the gap on it and then we'll get that back in. But first we need to find the compression stroke. So by using a screwdriver and a spark plug hole, the piston's right out at the minute. So what I need to do is crank the engine. What we're looking for is when that bottom valve closes, that and then reopens, which is the inlet valve, that's the compression stroke. So we're looking to bring the piston completely out of its bore and then set it back 1/4 inch. So rotate the engine clockwise. That's the exhaust. That's the inlet. So if we check the lay of the piston now, we'll find the hole. That's quite in, so obviously if we start to bring that back out, that's at top, so that's TDC, top dead centre. We just need to go 1/4 inch back, so we just need to over rotate the engine. So I don't think I've got enough hands for that, but let me just set that. So right, okay, so TDC plus 1/4 inch. Okay, so you can see there's a good 1/4 inch there where the piston's gone back. I've checked the tolerances on these and they're actually bang on. So I must have inadvertently managed to set them right in the first instance. So 0.15 tight, 0.15 loose. So I think it's 0.18 for the exhaust valve and 0.15 and below. There's 0.12 maybe for the air intake. I'll put the specs on the screen. I've forgotten them already, I've only just done them. But I'm going to get this valve cover back on. I'm going to try and give her a start and see if she fires up. Okay, so I've got the spark plug back in and the lead back on. The valve cover's back on as well. So we'll give her a try and see if we can get her started. Pop the key in. Easier said than done because it's frozen. Right, parking brakes set. Right, I need to... That's turning over a lot better, let's give it a little bit of fuel. bit more fuel. A bit more. There we go, get in! Happy days. Back right off. Off choke now. Well, too little choke. But at least she ran. So yes, happy days. What a relief that is. I honestly thought I'd killed it, but at least we've managed to get it started, and it seems to run pretty smooth actually, considering that the valves are set roughly. I haven't quite got the right size feeler gauges, so I've had to kind of guess it a little bit. But what I'll do is I'll order a new set of feeler gauges and I'll just tune the valve timing up as and when the weather improves a little bit, and I can start using it again. But at least we've not got to junk the engine on it, which is a massive win. So hope you found this informative. It was just an off-the-cuff video. Let me know in the comments if this is the kind of thing that people want to see. I doubt it, but let me know if I'm wrong. Anyway guys, catch you next time. Cheers.